Hey, what's going on guys, TurtyWurty here, and welcome back to another Minecraft modding tutorial for version 1.15. In this tutorial we are going to be going over how to create a passive entity. Now don't worry, passive entities are pretty much the same as hostile entities and neutral entities. However, just in case you do get confused, I will be doing separate tutorials on them in the future, maybe next tutorial or the one after, but I want to do them in the future as well. And a bit further in the future I will be doing bosses. So yeah, just so you know, all of the videos that I'm intending to do are in the description of this on a Trello board. So if you open that Trello board, you'll see all of the videos I'm planning to do for 1.15, and hopefully I will get through all of them, is my intention. Hopefully even by the end of the summer holidays, hopefully I will get through all of them, while we're still waiting for Forge 1.16. I will try to get through as many as I can. Anyways, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing you're going to want to go and create is your mod entity types class. So we're going to create this in our init package, and it's a new class, and that's called mod entity types. Now we are going to be using deferred registries for this. Obviously you can use object holders if you wish. So we want a public static final deferred register of entity type, and that's going to have a question mark in it, just like that. And we're going to call this entity underscore types, and that is going to be equal to a new deferred register of Forge registries dot entities, and then obviously your mod ID, so that is just tutorial mod.mod ID, and just import entity type and deferred registry and Forge registries and tutorial mod. Now we can create the registry object, so that is a public static final registry object, and that is going to take in entity type, and then that's going to take in our entity class, which I'm just going to call example entity, and let's call this variable example underscore entity, and that can just be equal to entity types dot register. First is the registry name, so example underscore entity, and then the supplier is just like normal, but then it is entity type dot builder of example entity. But you need to make sure you put a dot before these so that we can do the method afterwards, which is create, and that takes in the factory for our entity, so that is example entity : new. And then it is the entity classification, which basically defines how it will spawn, when it will spawn, and where it will spawn. If you remember, in our biome we said bees, and the classification for bees is creature, I believe. So creature is just animal, so all you need to do is entity classification dot, and you can do ambient, creature, mist, monster, water creature. So I'm just going to do creature. And then after that we need to set the size. So you can do dot size, and this is basically, this isn't the size of the entity, this isn't the size of the shadow, this is the size of the bounding box for the entity. Now because mine is going to be roughly the size of a sheep, I'm going to be setting it to the sheep bounding box, which is 0.9f and 1.3f. So obviously the first parameter there is the width, and the second parameter is the height, I believe, or it might be the depth. it's probably not going to tell me, is it? Because we still have errors. Yeah. Okay, so after that you want to do .build, and that is going to take in a new resource location of tutorialmod.modid, tutorialmod.modid, and then the name of your entity, so example underscore entity, and then you want to make that a string, so you do top2 string, and put a semicolon on the end, import resource location, and we can just format that. There we go, that's a bit nicer. Okay, so now that is it with that class. Obviously we'll need to make sure we import example entity once we create that, but we actually need to register this deferred register, and to do that we just go in our main class, and below mod container types we can do mod entity types dot entity types dot register to our mod event bus. Okay, so now we have done that, the next thing we can go do is actually create the entity class. So I have made a package called entities inside our main package, and in here I'm going to create the class example entity. Now because I'm doing a passive entity, I'm going to extend animal entity, and this basically defines what attributes it can have, what AIs it can run. So obviously you need to do the respected one for your entity, but in here we just want to add the constructor, just like that, and we want to make that constructor public. There we go. And that's pretty much it for the constructor actually. But I'm going to be doing a few things in here. So I want my entity to just be like a sheep, and I want it to be able to eat grass. So the way I'm going to do that is do a private eat grass goal. So basically AIs have now been renamed to goals, which is really weird. But yeah, they've now renamed them to goals. Obviously you can go ahead and create your own goals. They're not hard to make really. Like if we just look at the eat grass goal, on let's see, so we check that the block state is grass, and that will tell it if it should execute. And then if we find the tick function, so if it's grass, it destroys the block, but you can basically see how this works. It sets it to dirt, it plays the sound event, grass bonus, it does all that stuff. It's pretty simple, and to do this we also want a timer for our entity, so it knows when to start eating grass. So I'm just going to make that a private int, and I'm going to call this example timer. So this is basically just from the sheep code, if you were wondering. It's useful to just copy the vanilla entities where you can. Obviously if you can't, then you have to do goals yourself, but they're really not hard and you should be able to get the hang of it quite quickly anyways. Okay, so the next method we want is this method right here, create child, and in here we want to first create the entity. So to do that we just do example entity, and we'll call that entity is equal to a new example entity. Okay, and this is going to take in the entity type, so that's just mod entity types dot example entity dot get, and then the world in is just this dot world, just like that. And then what you can do, well first you want to do the initial spawn, so entity dot on initial spawn, on initial spawn, and we want to do this dot world. Oh god, I'm messing that up. This dot world, yeah, like that. And after the world, it's the difficulty, so this dot world dot get difficulty for location, a new block pos of entity, and then it's the spawn reason. So obviously ours is going to be spawn reason dot breeding, because it's creating the child, and then it's an I living entity data, and we're going to cast null. Well, cast null to that. No, that to null. I mean, and then you want the compound NBT, and we're casting compound NBT to null. Null to compound NBT. I always get those the wrong way around. And then we can just do return entity. Obviously here you can do anything else as well. So obviously you could do entity.set glowing as just an example, but you need to make sure you do that before you return it. Obviously we have an error here, but we can go ahead and fix that now by just importing example entity in our mod entity types. And there you go, that gets rid of the error there as well. And the next thing we want to do is register the goals, or AI, whatever you want to call it. So that just uses the register goals method. And in here you first want to call the super one, so super.register goals. And then you can do this dot eat grass goal is equal to a new eat grass goal of this. And then we can do this dot goal selector dot add goal, and then first is the priority, so basically how important it is. The lower the number here, the more important it is. Basically means how often it will run. So 0, and I will first do the swim goal. So this basically allows it to swim. It's pretty simple. And then we can do a few more. I'm just getting these ones from the sheet. I'm not doing anything extra special here. I am just doing like the normal things. So a panic goal of this, and this is the speed that it runs. So 1.25D is the normal speed that it will run at. And then the breed goal. So this dot goal selector. This dot goal selector dot add goal, and then priority is 3, and that is a new breed goal, and that is the entity, so this, and then the speed 1.0D, and then we got this dot goal selector dot add goal. Okay, there we go, that is all the goals. Next we can update the AI tasks, so update AI tasks. In here obviously we want to set the timer, so this dot example timer is equal this dot eat grass goal dot get eating grass timer, so that just creates the timer. And then living tick, so this is basically what you do while the entity is just going about. So in here we can do if this dot world dot is remote, so if it's client side, you could well, you need to do this dot timer is equal to math dot max 0, and then this dot timer so example timer -1. That just does some maths to work out the timer. And then super, and then you want to register the attributes, so register attributes. In here we want the super first thing, and then we can do this dot get attribute and then that is going to be shared monster attributes dots, and then these are all the attributes you can use. Just note that if you use attack damage, your entity has to be able to attack. So it has to be an attacking entity. So you can't just add any of these. You can only add the ones that your entity allows. So I'm just going to do the max health first. So dot max health, and then set base value. And this is basically how many hearts it has. So obviously a sheep has 8. So we could just do 16, which is pretty high. And then you can do this dot get attribute, shared monster attributes dot movement speed, and then you set the base value and the normal movement speed, and what I'm going to have it as well. Well, actually I'm going to have it a bit lower. So 0.23 is normal, so I'm going to have it as 0.20. There we go. Or we could just put 0.20D, and then we don't have to cast to a double. That just makes more sense, doesn't it? And then we've got a few more methods which I'm just going to copy from the sheep class. It's basically to do with head rotations when it's eating and stuff like that, which you can go ahead and copy from the sheep class. It's pretty, normal stuff. And here I've just done an example method of something you could do. So on struck by lightning, it sets it to glowing. That's just an example of what you could do in the sheep class. Okay, but next we need to go ahead and do the render, and then we need to go ahead and do the model. So let's go ahead and do that. So in our client package, I have created entity, and in here I've got the model and the render. So let's go first create the render class. So that is just going to be example render. Well, actually, it should be example entity render, as we're going to have different renderers in the future, which aren't going to be for entities. And this is going to extend mob renderer. And first it's the entity, so example entity. And then it's the entity model, so example entity model. And that is parameterized with our entity, so example entity. I know this is a bit of a generic spaghetti, but you don't really need to worry about that. It's just, that's what it's going to be, and you kind of have to deal with that. So in here first we need to create the texture path. So that is a protected static final resource location, and we can just call that texture. That can be equal to a new resource location if it loads. Yep, there we go. First is obviously the mod ID, so tutorial mod.mod ID, and then it's the path, so that can just be textures / entity / and then the name of our texture, so that's just going to be example _ entity.png. There we go. And next is just the constructor, so you can add that up here, or at least I thought you should be able to add it, but we have an error actually, so it's not going to add it, is it? So that is a public example entity render, and that's just going to take in the entity render manager, so entity render manager, and we'll just call that render manager in. And in here we can just super off of render manager in, and the model class, so a new example entity model of example entity double brackets, and then 0.5f. So the 0.5f is the shadow size, just so you know. And then the next method is get entity texture, so let's just use that and return texture. So finally what you need to go ahead and do is create the model. So I'm going to be using Blockbench, and all you need to do, as you can see, I've already created my amazing model right here, but all you need to do is create a new modded entity, and you need to make sure that it is all in one group called the body, and inside the body you split it up into all the parts. So basically every cube should be in its own group, which is inside the body. I know it's a bit complicated, but this is just how it works, and I mean, I hate modelling personally. As you can see, this is why this is not the greatest model in the world. It's just a showcase of what you can do. But you need to make sure everything's in its own group, and I will be showing you why very soon. Because if you don't, you're going to have to do some weird stuff, and you're going to have trouble with animations if you don't have it in its own group, because you can only animate groups. So for example, with this group, I can only rotate the group like that. I can't go ahead and rotate this cube. As you can see, no rotation ball comes up. Just yeah. And just create the texture. So to create the texture, you just create texture, tick the template box, confirm, and then that creates the texture that you want. And then afterwards you just export as a Java entity and you save it. And yeah, I will show you what you do from there. So let's just close this now because I don't need this anymore. And let's create this model class. So you can just use the one from Blockbench, but I'm going to actually create it and copy what I already have in. So example entity model. Okay, and I'm just going to go and find my random folder, because in my I basically have it all. I have the raw file somewhere. So if I go on my F drive, documents, random, and I look for model, open that. Okay. So when you export, your model class will look something like this. Now, as you can see, it is error galore, because Blockbench isn't suited for 1.15. Actually, that is one thing I do need to mention. If you're on Blockbench, you need to make sure your settings are 1.14. So go to settings, export, and make sure this is 1.14, not 1.12. Otherwise, it won't export it right. I mean, it already doesn't export it right, but you can just ignore that. So the first thing you will need to do is just add the package declaration up at the top, and then you need to rename the file back to what it's actually called. So example entity model is the name, so just rename that to example entity model, and that will fix that error. Well, once you've changed the constructor as well. Okay, and then you need to go ahead and change renderer model everywhere to model renderer, and that will fix some errors there once you've imported that. You need to delete the render method and create a new render method, which is this one, and just render the body in here. So you could do body.render, and it needs to be the one with the 4 floats at the end, and just use those. There you go. We also need the method set rotation angles. Yep, that one. Which we can just leave blank for now because I'm not going to be showing you animations in this tutorial. Okay, that's pretty much all. Wait, no, there's a lot more we need to change than that. So the next thing you need to change is actually up here. So this needs to be, it needs to have a generic, and that is T extends example entity. Just like that, and the entity model also needs T in it. Now obviously this is going to give an error down here because we're using entity. Just change entity to T, and that will fix that. And now we need to actually fix up this code because it's all wrong. Blockbench exports it wrong. It doesn't work for 1.15, so we have to write it out ourselves, which is a bit of a pain, but it's okay. So what you can do, keep this line right here because we're going to be using it to get our values. So you just do body.set texture offset, and these two values are the first two integers. So for me that's just 0, 0 for the body, 0, 0, and after that you do .add box. Okay, and this first takes in these floats right here, which is the positions. So it takes in the X, the Y and the Z position. So negative 6.0f, negative 6.0f, and negative 10.0f. And then it takes in these three ints right here, which is the size. So that is the width, the height and the depth. So 12, 8 and 18. And then it's the float, which is the scale. And then it's whether the texture is mirrored, which for me is false. And just make sure you add that comma. There you go. And then you can just delete that line. And that is it. And now you need to basically do that for all of these. So I'm just going to show you this one, and I will do the other ones off camera. So right back dot set texture offset 0, 0, and then add box. So that's just add box. First one is negative 6.0f, then it's 2.0f, then it's just 6.0f, and then it's 2, 6, 2. It's the scale, which is also known as the delta, and then it's whether it's mirrored or not, which is false. And that is it. You just delete that. And you just need to do these for the other ones as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I can pretty much just copy this because I've already done it myself. And there we go, that will fix all of that. Now what you might want to do is use the, you might want to create some getters for your stuff. So if you just type get, you can see it's get back, and then type get again, get body, get the front, get the head, and this is basically useful because these variables are private. So if you wanted to use these methods, those variables in a different class, presuming that you have an instance of this class, that won't be an issue. Obviously you don't need these methods if you don't want to. It's perfectly fine to not have them. I just think it's quite useful to have them. And that's pretty much it. The next method, just one last thing, is set living animations. And this is basically what you can do when the entity is going about. You can set its animations to what you need the animations to be. So yeah, and that's actually it for the model class. Obviously for more complex models you might be spending a while doing these texture offsets and boxes, but honestly it doesn't take too long. Obviously if you feel like you need to, you can create a generator to actually change what it was to this. That would be very simple to do. Obviously if you feel like doing that, you can go ahead and do that. No one's going to question it because it will be your generator, so you can do that if you want, but I don't feel the need to do that. Let's just go back into our entity render, import our model, and we have an issue here. Cannot be resolved to a type. I think entity, it's entity renderer manager, my bad. Yep, and that should be it for those classes. Now the last thing you need to do is you need to bind the renderer to the entity class, and we do that in the client setup. So if we go into util and we go into our client event bus subscriber, below where we've done the cutouts and the binding of screen, we can use rendering registry. So rendering registry dot register entity rendering handler, and that can be mod entity types dot example entity dot get, and then the render factory, which is just example entity render colon new, and just import that, and that is it. That is all you need to do for an entity. Now obviously this won't have a spawn egg. We haven't got to spawn eggs yet. I want a separate episode for spawn eggs. They're not hard, but it's just worth having a separate episode for anyways. So now let's go ahead and run the game, and I will see you guys in the game. Okay, so as you can see, we are now in the game, and if I go on top of the tree right here, and I do /summon tutorial mod example entity, yep, there it is, summon that, and here he, she, whatever is beautiful. We can punch it. Obviously it doesn't have sound yet, we'll be doing them soon as well. Let me get our item. Oh, now they're moving. Now they're moving. Interesting. Mighty interesting, isn't it? Summon it down here. Is it going to move? Yeah, because you're meant to be moving. I mean, moving has to be my hand. Is it not a movement goal? Like, oh, are we missing a goal? I feel like we're missing a goal. What do we set movement speed to? 0.2. That might be the issue. They might actually be moving, but it's very slow. That could be the issue. That's possible. I don't really see why else it would move. Yep, we have that one. They should be moving randomly. I think it's because we set our speed too low. Now they're not actually moving. Not like fast, but they're moving. So this isn't actually a breed item, so I can't breed them with it. So we did set a breed item. But they should also be eating grass. But that could take some time for them to... Oh, now they're moving. There we go. I don't know what I did to make them move, but now they're moving. Yeah, I don't know. I'm lagging quite badly. My computer doesn't have the best processor in the world. But they are moving now. So I don't know what I did, but they've decided they want to move now. Right? Like, you guys want to move now, right? Yeah, these guys don't want to move. I don't know, but they are moving now anyways. That was a bit weird. But this video is already getting quite long, so I do have to wrap it up here. So I hope you guys did enjoy this tutorial. If you did, please do be sure to smash your face into that like button and subscribe. If you really enjoyed it, please do be sure to share it. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.